Hello, everyone. Welcome. Glad you're here. And hopefully you are here today to learn a little bit more about our portrait of a leader. That is our focus. All right, we're going to go ahead and get into our content. Try to keep that resonating thought around the outcomes close to you. Be thinking about that as we go through this webinar with our panelists. When we are thinking about shifting the learning system, a lot of times what we try to do is think about traditional systems and how personalized competency-based systems are different. So this table aims to summarize some of those differences. And what we've learned from more than 20 years of working with states and districts and schools when implementing innovative teaching and learning practices is that there is a better way forward. Schools can provide the kinds of learning experiences that enable learners to uncover their passions and thrive in our evolving world. And they can become places where students develop ownership of their learning, have real-world experiences, and choose learning paths that fit their needs and interests. One of the things I like to do when I am looking at a table such as this is really narrow in on one area for myself, for my own professional practice that causes me to pause, that makes me curious, makes me want to know more. So I'm going to coach you to do that with this. If you haven't looked at the differences between traditional systems and personalized competency-based in a while, I would coach you to do that. Narrow down to one area as we move in to our discussion. All right, with that, I'm going to give you your first prompt for the chat. Here's your question. What is one factor that you think prevents sustainable education systems change? All right, as our answers are coming in, check out what people are saying. Time, exhaustion, turnover, the system itself, funding is coming up, effort, policy and mindset. Shout out to Estrada. A lot of comments around funding and money, misalignment with accountability requirements. These are great, y'all. Thank you. One of the things that we are really thinking about at KnowledgeWorks and with our partners and with people such as yourselves is this notion of sustainability, right? And you've all brought up many challenges in that area. And today, and in our resource, we're really attempting to tackle this notion of sustainability through the leadership lens. Because we know that change is hard and it requires dynamic leadership teams. And so that is one of the things that we are really trying to dig into. At KnowledgeWorks, our goal is to support states, districts, and schools on their journey to implement personalized competency-based learning. And as many of you know, as I know many of you on the webinar, sustaining change is a really difficult thing. So one of our goals is to support communities in doing that. And one way we've done that so far is through our Lead for Learners network. It was developed in partnership with educators from all over the country who are leading personalized learning in order to offer a peer support forum for collaborative learning and a place where change makers can seek advice and share strategies. And as you know, you learning from one another, practitioners on the ground, different roles, collaborating, coming together and learning and sharing strategies and ideas is the best kind of professional learning. So the Lead for Learners Network is really aiming to give people that opportunity. Today, we're going to talk in depth about the role of leadership in sustaining systems change today with a few of our educators who are members of our steering committee for our Lead for Learners network. Our discussion is going to center on the portrait of a leader, which was developed based on insights from educators across the country to identify the priority skills educators need to drive change and innovation. And the beautiful thing when you are doing a collective resource and listening to people from all over the country is that you get different perspectives, ideas from different local contexts. And it's been so rewarding hearing the thoughts from people across the country. Each of our panelists at today's webinar are part of our steering committee, as I said earlier. And that is a group of educators that drove the development of this resource of the Portrait of a Leader and are working with KnowledgeWorks to create more resources and professional learning opportunities to help schools and districts develop the leadership capacity that's needed to sustain systems change. Right now, I'm going to take a moment for the panelists to introduce themselves to you all. Please share who you are, your role, and a brief overview of your background with leading learner-centered systems change. And we're going to start with Estrada.
Thanks, Laura. Hey, everybody, welcome. Thanks for engaging with us today. Excited to share everything. My name's Estrada, coming at you from Mesa, Arizona. I'm currently serving in the Mesa Public School District as a secondary teaching and learning coordinator, really helping drive the work of learner-centered work here in Mesa. Before that, I was a principal at Rio Rico High School, which is also a school district that's part of the Arizona Personalized Learning Network. So in collaboration with KnowledgeWorks, we have an AZPLN with districts stemming across the state. And I've had the fortunate opportunity of working in 2 of those districts. While at Rio Rico, I helped lead learner-centered shifts as the school principal. And we couldn't really do a lot of this work here in Arizona without the partnership of the Center for Future of Arizona, which is really helping drive the AZPLN. So that's a little bit about me coming at you from Arizona, Mesa Public Schools.
Awesome, Estrada. Thank you so much. Next, we have Laura-Jeanne.
Hello, nice to have everyone here today. Thanks, Laura. My name is Laura-Jeanne Penrod, and I am in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I am the 2024 Nevada State Teacher of the Year and have been working with the state for about 5 years to move over to a competency-based system and the portrait of a Nevada learner, which we have worked with KnowledgeWorks, as well as I've been on our Nevada Future of Learning Network, which is all in about sustainability and how we can build these competencies around the state. I actually was up in our state capitol yesterday advocating for students to be on every school board in the state, presenting a bill on that, as well as advocating for our competency-based ed bill with the Education Committee. So we are definitely making strides in Nevada to make this a permanent solution in our state. So we are definitely still actively working on it, and I'm excited to be here today to share some of our successes and some of the work that we are still working towards.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Laura-Jeanne. And next up, we have Kristen.
Everyone, Kristen Watkins from Dallas, Texas. I serve as the Managing Director of Personalized Learning and Curriculum at Akiba Yavneh Academy. It is a small private school here in the area. Before this role, I spent 14 years in Dallas ISD leading our innovation and personalized learning work across a very large urban district. So I've had the privilege of working in a very large system and now in a small. And I'm also towards the end of my dissertation, starting to get towards the end of it, looking at sustainability and innovation and PCBL beyond 5 years. So excited to be with you all this afternoon.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Kristen. And I'm just going to shout them out before we get into questions. Just thank you so much for your dedication, your thought leadership, everything you're doing in your learning communities and your service on the steering committee. All right, participants, we're going to get into some questions. And all of our questions are going to be to the panelists, of course, and about their perspective when it comes to the portrait of a leader. Before I start into the questions, let's take a pause, a moment to check out the portrait of a leader slide there. And you'll notice that there are 5 attributes. And each of the attributes have a little bit of description underneath. So I want to give you a minute to check that out, and then we will do questions. So as I mentioned, we're going to dig into the elements of the portrait of a leader and what the skills it captures look like in practice. And I'm going to coach you to think about your local context, your local role, what's coming up for you as you're examining this portrait and as you are listening to the panelists in their responses. So my first question is going to be for Kristen. Before we dig into those skills, can you share what drove the educators on the steering committee to prioritize developing this resource and why you pushed for this work?
Sure. So it feels crazy to think it was only 13 months ago that we were in Mesa and we met for the very first time in person. And we had the opportunity to really think big and how we as a new committee could impact the field. And so we often refer to this day as the day we covered an entire whiteboard wall full of ideas. And at the end of it, there were Post-its and arrows and lines and chart paper everywhere. But at the end of it, we really landed on 3 priorities, one around leadership development, the second around network development and sustainability of this collective group, and then that last being advocacy. And so for me, I really held on to the leadership development. Being in a district role for 10 years, one of the biggest things we saw was turnover and promotion of our most amazing leaders doing the PCBL work at the campus and at the district level. And oftentimes when people get promoted and move on for lots of different reasons, there isn't always a bench ready, if you will. And so having this like common language and a framework to help strengthen coaching and support and really make sure this work lives on beyond the work that we do in our time in our systems and roles was something that was really important for me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kristen. Okay, the next question's for Estrada. What might you add to what Kristen shared? What do you think deeper leadership development, or I'm sorry, why do you think deeper leadership development is important to your district's vision and the national movement for personalized competency-based learning?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Kristen did a great job summarizing that. I would just say, if you've never done a charrette protocol with Laura, and you get the opportunity to, it's going to yield some amazing thinking and ideas. And that's the protocol Kristen was referring to, which helped just launch this work, right? But what I would add in regards to that second question, why do I think deeper leadership development is important to the district's vision and national movement? Just referring back to a slide we had up earlier regarding shifting the learning system. And if you've had the opportunity to be in a leadership role to shift from a traditional to student-centered learning system, you know it's not easy. You know it takes considerable work in regards to mindsets and being human-centered and understanding where people are and meeting people where they're at to then get them to get to that next step. And if you look at that T chart that was up, how do we really construct an environment where student voice and choice is happening for impact, right? And so when I was a school leader and in the current role I serve now, I always ask myself, okay, we can have student voice and choice, but what are we doing with that? What are we doing with the voice and choice? What impacts and actions are we taking next? And so that's why it's important to really invest in deeper leadership, because it's not easy to do that, right? And so in Mesa Public Schools, our district vision is, I would always say the Mesa promise is to know every student by name, serve them by strength and need, and make sure they're college, career, and community ready. And if we're going to do that, we have to support our leaders to shift into that learner-centered practice, to know them and serve them by strength and need. And so I would say that's why it's important. In regards to the national movement of PCBL, really investing in our leaders to lead that work is going to be important. And we were intentional with leadership not being a role, right? So the leadership is not necessarily the principal. Leadership is everyone on that campus that's ready and willing to take on that next step, whether that's the teacher in the classroom, instructional coach, a student leader, the assistant principal, stakeholders, board members, right? All of those individuals within a school system can be leaders in leading the work. And so I would also say that's why it's important.
Lovely, Estrada. I really think that the things you're sharing around leadership development back in your local context and thinking about sustainability as an intentional, active priority, right? So that we can really say, yes, leadership matters here. We have the data on where we were and now we're looking at where we want to go. But I think what tends to happen with leadership as a team in and of itself is, yes, we want to sustain this vision. We want to sustain this work. But in order to do that, we really have to invest in ourselves and learn what it means to sustain as a team, right? So it's really that intention on both sides.
Certainly.
Lovely. Thanks, Estrada. All right, to Laura-Jeanne we go. What have you noticed about teacher leadership development in schools and districts working on systems change? And why do you think leadership development is important at all levels?
So I would like to thank my committee member Estrada for bringing in that everyone is a leader. And I think sometimes that is frequently not acknowledged on campuses or in the space of education, that it's not about just the principal on the campus being the leader or the superintendent being the leader. Essentially, we are all leaders in some capacity, including our students. And I think that what I've noticed throughout systems change is sometimes that mindset is very hard to shift. And that's just full transparency, that not everybody is always welcoming to the idea that even students are leaders and that we can have co-collaborative spaces with our students and that they can actually lead themselves in their own learning. I have been heavily trained in project-based learning for over 15 years. So this model is not absent on me of leadership being taken by students in their learning. And I think as we're progressing in competency-based ed and we're looking at these systems change, I think that's a common thread, is that students need to be more accountable in their learning and teachers need to be more of a support role, a coach, a mentor, a guide. We are not the only disseminators of information anymore. And how do we help our students think critically about what they're learning and guide them towards those solutions? As far as teacher leadership, I do see a lot of, in our state, we're working towards the portrait of a world-class teacher. And what does that mean? So we're trying to develop something that is meaningful for teachers, that they don't have to leave the classroom in order to take a quote unquote leadership role, such as an admin role, or even, leaving the classroom to do instructional coaching, because there's a lot of teachers who want to lead, but they don't necessarily want to leave the classroom. So how can we utilize their skills? How can we put them in leadership opportunities, whether that's mentoring other teachers, whether that's putting them as a teacher lead, whether that's giving them some time to work with individual teachers, but still have a teaching schedule because they enjoy the classroom. And I think it's really important that we start, again, including our students, because that's something that I'm really, really adamant about. And I can tell you just from my experience up at the legislature yesterday, that even our assembly members are still a little hesitant to trust students. And I basically said, we have got to start trusting them, because we say we want them to be accountable, but then we don't put them in the seat of leadership and trust that they will make the right decisions. And at what point are we going to trust them? When they're 18 and off to war and able to buy a gun? No, we have to teach them how to be responsible before that moment. not at that moment, because we are not setting them up for success in that moment if we haven't given them the opportunities to lead prior to that. So I think as the system evolves, I think it's a collective. And I think the more we view ourselves as a community of leaders instead of one set leader who's leading everything, I think we can shift the system to become more co-collaborative for everyone, not just one person.
Awesome, Laura-Jeanne. Shout out. Woo! I really appreciate you lifting up the strategy of thinking about teacher leadership in their roles, in different roles. And it's not just, oh, I want to be a principal, and so now I'm going to go do that. That participants is a strategy in and of itself, right? And I really also want to emphasize that when we're thinking about sustaining our leadership, just as Laura-Jeanne mentioned, we need to bring our students into that conversation. And all of us could be thinking more deeply about how we're going about that and how consistent we are, right? Awesome. All right, y'all. Now that you've heard a little bit from the panelists, we're going to go back to that portrait of a leader overview with the 5 attributes, and we're going to have you do an audience poll. Which of these skills do you or other education change makers in your community leverage the most? Which one would you say is your top? All right, we've got some results coming in. Looks like collaborative is being lifted up as a priority. Makes sense that that one would be resonating or be lifted up by all of you, right? Because a lot of us work in the learning communities where we need to really try to be as collaborative possible and create shared goals and actions together. Looks like human-centered came in 2nd place. That too makes sense, right? If we're really focusing on personalized competency-based learning, we really want to center everyone's voices and really work on relationships. And I will speak to this in just my own experience that typically when you have attributes such as collaborative and human-centered, right, it's going to be pretty common that those are going to get lifted up. And these other ones, which I'm always curious about, right, authenticity, advocating, and being transformational, maybe they don't get as much consistent attention as we need them to in order to sustain as leaders. Thanks so much for doing that, y'all. We are going to move into our 2nd round of questions with our panelists. But before we do, I think you are seeing the full view of the answers with those 2 that we just raised to the top. All right, our next question is for Estrada. What does it look like when a school level leader in your district is demonstrating one or more of these attributes? How have their actions helped to drive change?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as you all got to see the portrait of a leader maybe for the first time, you'll see at the bookends that transformational and human-centered are a little larger, as we work through that, identifying like these are 2 essential skills, mindsets, attributes to then get to collaborative and advocate. And so what does that look like from one of our school leaders and how their actions help to drive change? At the center of our instructional framework is learner agency. And that's been in place for several years. And so to really shift our instruction to get to learner agency, Mesa Public Schools has been intentional with how we're going to get there. And they started by doing freshman teams. So if you're not aware, Mesa Public Schools is the largest school district in Arizona, and our comprehensive high schools have over 3,000 kids at each. And we really wanted to approach learner-centered practices by being human-centered. And we started doing teaming and cohorting students at the freshman level to create this sense of belonging for our students through feedback and input from the community. Our high schools are large, and so at times students feel like they're in this big space and may not be seen. And so starting with the intentionality of cohorting kids the freshman year in teams and supporting them with teachers and educators really created a sense of belonging for our students in that first year. And so I would say that intentional shift to cohorting kids and teaming at that freshman year was really listening to input and feedback to get to learner agency, to shift to PCBL work, but being human centered first, right? And being intentional with that. And so principals and district leadership prior to me even joining made that decision because they knew it was what was best for kids and best for our educators. Our educators on those freshman teams have a high retention rate and high success rate and just a high level of culture and morale from the educator's perspective. And so that's been great to see, but to transform work at a comprehensive high school with 3,000 plus learners, right? You had to start small and start thinking about the human-centered piece first. And so that's been an action step that's led to some success as other schools have started to then progress towards the other grades. As an example I'd like to share.
Thanks, Estrada. That reminds me of a leader that I got to serve alongside many years ago, I should say now, who did these principal cabinets. And he had one that was for freshman students only for that reason. So the other cabinet was mixed with family members, staff, a variety of students, right? But he also had a freshman only cabinet, and it's, to your point, similar reasons, right? Bring them into the culture, make sure they have a voice, they're listened to, they're starting to build their own cohort and their own relationships, but it was in service of their learning community, because the purpose of the principal's cabinet was to be solutionaries, right? Hey, here's a problem we're having. What ideas do you have for us to solve it together, right? So that emphasis of bringing in our new students or our initial high school students and really giving them voice and a home on a smaller scale, I think is a great example.
Yeah, it's been great to see, and it just really epitomizes like that human-centered approach, right? And the importance of that. You're gonna gain more in your change management of leading this work if you start with the people first.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks so much, Estrada. We're going to move over to Laura-Jeanne. What are some ways you have leveraged these skills to drive systems change? What have you seen in other teacher leaders or instructional coaches?
So I actually love this question a whole lot because my platform for Teacher of the Year and my keynote was how to retain and recruit teachers was authenticity, advocacy, and autonomy. Because a lot of people want to throw money at things, and though, yes, we need livable salaries and all of those things are incredibly important, but when you take away some of these things from teachers, it takes away their ability to show up as themselves, which is the most beautiful gift every teacher can give their classroom, is them. And so I'm really big on the human-centered piece because we are not human doings, we are human beings. And we are supposed to be in our spaces and feel safe in our spaces. And building relationships is one of the most, I think, monumental tools I have used in making systems change in Nevada. And I will use an example of yesterday at the legislature. I have worked with my students to teach them about our Nevada system. They have done advocacy work with me. They have had legislative impact by helping pass financial literacy legislation, cultural and religious regalia being allowed at graduation. And yesterday I ran into 6 different students I have had that were advocating at the Capitol yesterday, not for a grade from me, not because I was telling them they needed to do it, but because I built relationships with them to help teach them the importance of uplifting their voice, right? They have a voice. We just need to give them the opportunity to do it. But I also have built such strong relationships that as I was sitting there presenting to the education committee yesterday about the importance of having students on every school board, I looked at the committee and I've made relationships with part of those assembly members already over the last 5 years. So now I have personal connections with the people who now are seeing me present something that I'm bringing forward as important, as well as the assembly person or member who's sponsoring the bill. I built a relationship with him in 2022. I've helped him throughout his campaigns and his work. And we would never be making any systems change, such as having financial literacy work now become a course that every student will take. We wouldn't have that change if I didn't build the relationships with these people. And I didn't show students that building relationships is incredibly important, right? And I think building a relationship with my state superintendent, building a relationship with committee members, like Estrada and Kristen and Emily and you, like we're a broad network now of people across the country that can help support each other. And I think that human-centered piece, sometimes we know it's there, and yet we don't sometimes realize the big impact. The greatest gift I received as the 2024 Nevada State Teacher of the Year was not having a state dinner at the White House. It was the 55 people that are in my corner as state teachers of the year that I know I can put in a group chat. I have a problem or we're concerned about something, and we can all come together and mastermind together how to make that change happen. And we're talking about people who are teachers, instructional coaches, they've moved into different roles possibly, and yet we're collaborating to make these changes because we've built these relationships of caring about each other and the system and our students and how we want to see it progress. And I think the more we focus on that human-centered approach, the more we can realize that community is the way that we heal and that we make change in this country.
Oh, well said, Laura-Jeanne. As I was listening to you, I was thinking about that advocacy piece and how you were saying earlier about the trusting of the young people, and the more they show up, that relationship and that trust is going to grow, right? The faith in that is going to grow. But I also think what you're saying about having that cohort and building those relationships, if we can do that with intention, then I think that's going to fuel some of us to be a little more bold because we know we've got people that have our back, right? Because I think you mention it all the time in your role, how teachers don't necessarily think that they have a big voice in advocating for education as they do, right? Whether that's at their board meetings, in their buildings, or to your level at the state level, right? So I think that is one thing to think about, is how are we building those cohorts? How are we getting involved so that we can grow that advocacy muscle and help each other out? Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for capturing that so well.
Yay. All right, we're going to move on to the next question, and that one is for Kristen. How do most districts or schools approach leadership development today? Where do you see the biggest opportunities for growth and impact on students and educators?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I think that leadership development, my personal opinion, it has probably been the slowest to change in a lot of this innovation work. I don't know about others' experiences, but I feel like more often than not, like you're often thrown into a new role and hope that you learn along the way. And I think that when we think about the biggest opportunity for growth is really starting to move away from this one size fits all approach to professional development and coaching and support to more of a one size fits one. And I think that it's such a missed opportunity to not align our leadership training and development to the models that we want to be true for kids. If you've read George Couros' book, The Innovator's Mindset, it is ingrained in my mind is we rarely create something different until we experience something different. And I think that that could not be more true in the work that we are doing. And I think, like for me, the biggest opportunity is really honing in on the support that we provide our leaders, because that in turn creates the culture and an environment for our staff, which then ultimately results with the culture and the environment that we want our kids to be learning and growing up in. And I think that that comes through this experiential learning. And then I think too, the other piece is like you have to manage the change and have a change process to be able to sustain this beyond the first few years of excitement in this like transformation work.
Beautiful. I love what you said about change process and actually having one, right? Really thinking about, and this connects back to a couple of things Estrada was bringing up. What is your strategy going to be? You have these resources, and as professional beings who need to learn from one another, right? What is going to be our strategy, that change process that's going to sustain to help our leaders grow with each other? And Kristen, it sounds like from our participants, Joanne would love to hear more from you about managing the change, quote unquote. What comes up for management from your perspective?
Yeah. So in the research that I am doing for my dissertation, and I interviewed 20 expert panelists, superintendents, district leader, teacher leaders, around what does it look like when you are 5 years into the work and it is sustained into the systems. And I think what stood out to me was that people were naming an actual process for change. So like when something doesn't work, what does the group do? And having the habits to go back to that change, whether it's rapid prototyping or design thinking, a lot of the things that came out was like they could name a very specific process. And I think too, something else that has stood with me is like really figuring out how to, I think Laura-Jeanne hit on this earlier, this human-centered piece and like really leading with empathy, and designing with your community, not for your community, and really trying to figure out like intentional roles to help bring all stakeholders in the process being a part of the process. I could talk about this for hours, but hopefully that's helpful.
Awesome. I love it. I think it is. I think naming specific processes or strategies to how you operate is huge. And it reminds me of an experience I had with young people where we would center cultural problems we were having, school issues of different kinds. We would center those with our student advisors, right? Our advisor reps. And that student body, not student government, not a traditional student government, students that wanted to grow in their leadership came up with specific tools and processes and protocols that they would use as a student group to help the school community solve a problem. So that's another example, but a lot of times we can't be specific when we think about that, oh, well, we're going to have a meeting, right? And then you have the meeting and did we get anywhere? So really that specificity and naming those things, learning about the specific ones that help us the most is awesome. Thank you, Kristen. Okay. I think, and Joanne, I see your comment in chat. Sounds like it normalizes the stress of the change process. Well said. And I think it helps break it down. If we can really honor and trust the process of whatever we're using and get used to doing that, make it a habit, it does help. It eases that stress. And it also, over time, will become more and more of just how we are. It's the habit of how we operate together. So I think it reduces the stress, and I also think it normalizes this notion that change is a journey, and we're going to tackle it. We're going to tackle it in steps. Awesome, everyone. Thanks so much. All right. We're going to move into some questions and or reflection next. And we have about 10 more minutes with you all. Wow, does it go fast or what? But I just want to flag if there are any questions in chat that I missed, if someone could lift that up. Otherwise, we'll move into our reflection. Okay, thank you. I'm seeing that we haven't missed any big questions yet, so that's a good thing to know. Thanks so much. So what I'm going to have you do is take a minute and check out this prompt. Based on what you've heard so far and your local context, your professional practice, what's one reflection or idea that you took away from our discussion? While people are thinking about that, we did get a question coming in for our panelists. So Estrada, Laura-Jeanne, Kristen, whichever want to take this one. And the question is, what kinds of discussions have panelists had around possible upcoming budget changes with the feds and how this can hinder prioritizing PD leadership plans, change processes? Has that come up for any of the three of you?
I was just speaking with our assembly member who's the Speaker of the House of the Assembly side in Nevada yesterday. And Nevada, anyways, is very dedicated to teachers right now, incredibly so. And so I'm really honored to be in this state right now. But I do think some of the conversations that have been happening amongst my cohort in some states where it might be a little more challenging or things might be, questionable about some of these changes that are happening is what can we do as a collective community to support teachers, to support PD, to support leadership plans, and how can we reconfigure maybe some of the structures of where we are spending money to be able to continue these things because they know that they can't let them go. And a lot of our state is looking at what grants are available that are not federally funded in other places that might be available to be able to help with that. And I know eventually there might be a limited amount of money that is available. And I'm going to go back to community. I really think we need to start leaning on our community partners. We have a lot of them here in Las Vegas, and we have major casinos and everything else that our students go off to go into the workforce. And how can we leverage who is in our communities that can help support the load? Because some of us are in communities that are, pretty much doing pretty well with other business ventures. And how can those businesses or the workforce start to support the education community? Because that's been a big piece here in Nevada when we're working on the portrait is how can the workforce community start to come in to actually support the education system that they inherit the students of, right? I mean, essentially, that is their workforce. I mean, our students stay in Nevada a lot. So how can we make it a collaboration of you help us, and then we're going to actually be able to produce and help support students that are ready for you once they're ready to graduate and be, or even as they're still in school working. So just a thought of how maybe we're looking at it here in Nevada is how can we lean on more of the workforce contributions and how can we look to other things?
Awesome. Yeah, I really think we're talking about that ecosystem that we've wanted to have for millennial, right? And this notion that, it's a community, and why do we always separate things out, right? And really looking at the successes of our community, how can we work together? And I think we are seeing a bit of an uptick in that area with city councils, depending on your local context and the pipeline, right? What kinds of strategies is the city using to grow their pipeline? And some of them are starting to really lean into working hand in hand and in good partnership with their school districts. All right, we have some wonderful, oh, and I'm sorry, Kristen or Estrada, anything to add on that question? Or are we good? I think we're good. Thanks, Kristen. Wonderful reactions in chat. Thank you so much for sharing. I love how Leanne's talking about empathy and our role of empathy in our communication with our people, with our relationships. That's another one, intentional practice. I think people walk around and think they can just empathize, and maybe we can, right? And then other times we know we're supposed to be doing it, and maybe we need to be doing a better job, but that we can teach and learn about that like other things. Julian's talking about advocating for and implementing change in a substantial collaborative effort. Thanks for sharing that one. I know processes and naming the specific ones came up several times, and strategies. Anytime you want to talk protocols and processes, I am your lady. I love processes and protocols, right? I'm always a sucker for a good protocol and our process. And I really think it's important that community members are involved in those, and that we can and really see the habits, like I was saying before, of the ones we use. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. We're going to do a quick closure around next steps. First, Kristen, can you please share what is next for this work and how people can get involved?
Yeah, so right now there are plans in place to help really take these attributes, right? So I have mine in front of me, and really building out competencies and rubrics to go with each of those attributes. And we are also in the process of putting together an emerging leaders program to help schools and district leaders help develop a bench of leaders to sustain this work long term. And so for both of those, we're looking for partners to help build resources and develop those tools out, and then also to help reduce those PD costs for schools and districts to participate.
Awesome. Exciting stuff. Thank you so much. And Estrada, would you mind letting everyone know about our online community?
Yeah, so we have an online community, and some of you may already be part of the Lead for Learners online community. If you are, go ahead and drop an emoji in the chat, a thumbs up, a heart, a smiley face. Give us some engagement if you are already part of the Lead for Learners community. And if you're not, you have the opportunity to join this community. It's the best way to stay up to date, involved with the work that's going on here. We host a number of different things. By we, I mean the team hosts a number of different things, from Ask Me Anythings to an advocacy resource tonight with Laura-Jeanne. So lots of different things that take place in the Lead for Learners online community. So please join if you're not already there, and thank you if you are locked in with us.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Estrada. I know we just have a minute left. You will see a QR code there for the Emerging Leaders cohort that is now forming. We are hoping to kick that off this coming June, and it is a national cohort open to anyone. And we are looking for those spots to be filled. So if that sounds interesting to you, we would love for you to check out that QR code and express your interest. I should say that there is an overview on the website too, with more details about all of those opportunities, the ones that Estrada brought up, as well as the Emerging Leaders cohort. You can check that out at leadforlearners.org. Thank you everyone for joining. Always good to be here and to learn and listen from new folks and returning folks. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you at the next event.